Good afternoon and welcome to the Bullpen Theater here at the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. We also want to welcome those of you joining us on Facebook Live. We're trying to do as many of our in-museum events as hybrid events so that we can get as many people here. Not everyone can make it to Cooperstown, be as lucky as we are. And we're lucky to have with us Katie Krall. Katie is someone who has made history this year. Before I tell you more about Katie, just want to introduce myself very quickly. My name is Bruce Markison. I work in the education department. And it'll be my pleasure to talk to Katie. Katie is a coach with the Portland Sea Dogs. Previously has worked Major League Baseball, also worked for the Cincinnati Reds organization, but now the development and first base coach for the Sea Dogs, who are the AA affiliate of the Red Sox. And earlier this year, Katie made history becoming the first woman to appear on field as a coach in a AA game. Very exciting that you're here in Cooperstown during a road trip to Binghamton. Thanks for being with us, Katie. How are you?
Oh my gosh, Bruce, it's such a treat. I love Cooperstown.
People are probably wondering, why am I holding this Portland Sea Dogs helmet? This is about to be officially donated by you, and I guess this was from your first game as first base coach, April 30th. Tell us more about the helmet and how it made its way to Cooperstown.
Helmet is from spring training in Fort Myers. Our Sea Dogs coach, Chad Epperson, turned to me one day and he said, "Katie, grab a Scully. You're coaching first today." So got my first taste of it in spring training, which was great. I think we went 3 for 3 that day in stolen bases, so I'll take small credit for that. And then brought it with me to Portland, and then I believe that game was against the Somerset Patriots in New Jersey.
Were you nervous that day?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I was texting my mom and my twin sister and my dad, and all they kept saying was, "Don't get hit." You know, you don't want to be the first female coach that gets a line drive back to the head. So I think that was my primary concern. But then after that, just wanted to make sure I gave the guys the information that they needed to feel like if they wanted to steal, that they had, you know, his times to home plate and what they felt like they could get a good jump on.
I understand that you contacted the Hall of Fame about coming here and you asked about donating an item. So really, you kind of initiated this whole process.
Absolutely, yeah. I figured that if I was in town and I could swing by, obviously I'm like very aware of the historic nature of my hiring. So it felt like as the hall seeks to expand its footprint in terms of women and people of color and different individuals who have impacted the game, I would love to be a part of that history.
Now looking inside, it's a size 7. It's got kind of black encased padding that goes all the way around the perimeter. There's also padding the crown of the helmet as well. It's got the vents. This is something we've seen, I guess, over the last 10, 12 years. What exactly do the vents do?
I think they're supposed to keep it cool, and I would say for the most part it does that, especially at those spring training games in Florida.
Yeah. Obviously, the classic B Red Sox logo. We see some coaches go with the ear flap or double ear flap, but you're going with the old style helmet. Why do you do that?
You know, I like the classic look. My godfather was the old head coach of the Minnesota Twins for 32 years, so very traditional baseball mentality, and I think if he were still here, that would be the helmet he'd want me to wear.
Later today, this is going to be accessioned. It's going to officially become part of the collection. People might notice that I'm actually handling it without gloves right now, which they told me I could do. But once it becomes part of the collection, anybody on staff or any visitor touching this helmet will have to use gloves, and we'll have to, I'm trying to take care of it even with bare hands, but the procedures are going to change once it officially becomes part of our collection. What does that mean to you, knowing that piece of your equipment's here forever?
It's a true honor, Bruce. And I was a history major at Northwestern, so the idea that someone in the future could look through the archives and find that and hear about my story or the way that baseball is incorporating more women into the game on the field, it's a phenomenal opportunity, and it's really an honor.
You ever tempted to wear it backward like a catcher?
Maybe.
No?
Someday.
Yeah.
Maybe my next helmet, we'll see.
Yeah. Very cool. So this will become our newest item here at the Hall of Fame. We have over 40,000 three-dimensional artifacts, helmets, caps, balls, gloves, jerseys, cleats, all sorts of great stuff. Let's talk a little bit, Katie, about your career path. You started out, I believe, in terms of baseball, working in the front office of Major League Baseball. What did you do there?
I was a league economics and operations coordinator at headquarters, so that was focused on the CBA, salary arbitration, rule changes. Really cool opportunity, Bruce, to get a macro level perspective of the sport. So what happened there, those were conversations that only took place in New York. Whereas I think with the Reds, if you work with the Blue Jays, if you're with the Yankees, everyone has the same goal. You're trying to win a World Series ring. Whereas at MLB, I think you're trying to shepherd the next generation and the future of the sport. So I really loved it and was able to meet a lot of really interesting people who then I think helped me make that next step to a team, to the Cincinnati Reds.
You were completely in the office, or were there travel opportunities?
At MLB, I would travel fairly often. For example, like the winter meetings or when we had our salary arbitration meetings, those would either be in Arizona or Florida, so I would be in person for those. Again, like when you put together the decks and the information when you're from the league office side about how you believe that player should be compensated for the upcoming season.
Tough job?
Very challenging in that it was incredibly dynamic. So I think people who really succeed in baseball, especially at the league office, are utility players in many ways, in that the role is constantly changing. And so it's very invigorating to work in that type of environment, but you have to be able to pivot and you have to be able to adapt to meet the demands of the stakeholder that you're currently working with.
Who'd you report to in that job?
Chris Young, who's now the general manager of the Texas Rangers.
Okay. Not to be confused with the Chris Young, who's a broadcaster for MLB Network. Chris Young, the former pitcher, right?
Chris Young's everywhere, yes.
Yeah, yeah. About 6'8", right?
He's a
Really
large
tall
man,
right-hander.
yes.
Yeah.
Phenomenal human being.
From there, you went to the Cincinnati Reds. What'd you do for them?
I was a baseball operations analyst, so I always describe myself as a type of Jonah Hill, in that I would help determine who we should sign, what we should pay them, and where they should play on the field. So again, really exciting. We made the playoffs in 2020, almost made them again in 2021. Coaching staff, David Bell, Alan Sinter, Derek Johnson, just a really great group of people, and so loved that. And I felt like because it was a smaller market club, I was able to be involved in more things because there were fewer cooks in the kitchen. Whereas I think if I had gone to the Yankees or the Dodgers or a franchise that has a lot of really smart people in specialized roles, I probably wouldn't have had the exposure that I did.
I think when you trace back baseball analytics, it really started to pick up steam, maybe late 90s, early 2000s. Early on, you'd hear a lot of conflict between the analytical people and the old school baseball people who believed that everything had to be satisfied with the eye test. You had to see people to know what kind of ability they had. What's it like now? Is there still that tension? Does that exist between the two camps?
I definitely think that is inherent on the field. I would say it probably does not exist anymore in the front office. So I think of all 30 clubs, if you were in a draft room, if you were at the trade deadline in their war rooms, everyone's going to be looking at the same types of information. They might be labeled differently, they might be aggregated in a different manner, but I think for the most part, it's very quantitative. On the field, that is not necessarily the case. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of my job with the Red Sox is seeing up close, there are pitching coaches who still think that wins are the best indicator of pitcher performance, or there are players who still will be very fixated on their batting average. And to me, I had thought, the war was kind of settled and the nerds won, and it definitely is not like that on the field. So I think that's been really eye-opening for me to be able to be a part of that and maybe introduce them to new ways of thinking about the game that aren't necessarily paradigm shifting, but kind of push them in a direction that I think is going to allow them to have a more holistic understanding of the sport.
Yeah. Has there ever been a situation in the past where a manager, coach, player approached you and said, I don't want to hear about analytics, I have my way of doing things, stay away? Maybe they were a little politer than that, but did you ever get that vibe?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when I was on the Cape in 2017, we had Brendan Donovan on the team and Nick Sandlin, both who have big league time now, but there was a coach there who referred to me as the girl who does the stats, right? Like, and it was, I think, jokingly for him, kind of an idea of how I was an anomaly, or that the numbers didn't fit his thinking. And I think what I've always tried to do throughout my career is to meet the person where they are. So never forcing anything on a player, like Hudson Potts, for example, who's with us in the Sea Dogs. He really only wants to know the max fastball velocity on a pitch. So for me, I'm not going to talk to him about the ride on it. I'm not going to discuss the usage. It's really tailoring and customizing your approach to what you think can help the player and what he needs. So if anyone ever does have that attitude, it's being respectful of it and never forcing them to interact with something that they find uncomfortable or frustrating, but also recognizing there are probably ways to influence and maybe subliminal or softer manners.
I give you credit for being more diplomatic than I think I would have been if someone had, made some sort of a remark, a crack about what I do. You never were tempted to say, hey, this is how it's going to be done, you better live with it? You never said that?
I definitely think there's this balance between being respectful, but also holding your ground
Yeah.
and knowing what you bring to the table. And when I was interviewing with the Red Sox, I think that was a point that I really tried to get across to our director of player development, in that I recognize I'm entering their space. I'm
Yeah.
entering a world that previously I haven't necessarily been in before, right? I haven't been in uniform, I haven't been a coach in the past, but I also know like I am being hired for a reason, and that the information that I am providing can be valuable. So I think you do have to, at the end of the day, be willing to hold your ground in those situations where you know you have to fall on the hill.
Conversely, Katie, have you ever met an old school baseball guy who really surprised you by embracing analytics? I think of it on the broadcast side, somebody like David Cohn, who was a terrific pitcher, was a real gamer. I mean, he would throw 140, 150 pitches with some regularity, but he has really embraced the statistical revolution. Anybody like that you've come across?
Absolutely. In spring training, one of my favorite pitching coaches to speak with is Bob Kipper, who's our Greenville pitching coach. And initially wasn't necessarily on the quantitative train whatsoever, but over the past few seasons, he, is the first person out there to look at the TrackMan dashboard or to talk about the spin axis on the ball. So it's super cool to see him combine his more traditional thinking on the sport in terms of evaluating makeup, thinking about how to pitch, emphasizing command, and then also being able to leverage Electronic video or some of the sports science tech that we have. And I think those types of coaches, when they can kind of straddle both worlds, those are the most valuable people you can have in the dugout.
I remember Bob Kipper when he pitched. I'm much older than you, but I remember him back in the 80s, kind of a soft tossing left-hander, but had a decent career. He was with the Pirates, among other clubs. How'd you get involved with baseball? How did this whole thing get started? As a fan, as a player, combination of the two? Where's your roots in baseball come from?
Definitely. My mom was on the board of the White Sox, and so I grew up understanding that there was another side to the game that didn't necessarily take place on the field. So she would come home with these binders outlining what it would cost to have hot water at US Cellular Field, what is now Guaranteed Rate Field, or things about infrastructure and facilities, and all of these like more business types of topics that as like a 9 or a 10-year-old I thought were really fascinating. So I always knew there was this other side of the game that I wanted to be a part of. And then I read Moneyball when I was 13 in the back of my homeroom of my 7th grade class. And it completely changed my thinking about the game, right? ERA isn't necessarily the best measure of pitcher performance. Why do we not value walks more? Just all of these things, I think honestly, Bruce, it gave me permission to challenge convention, and that there aren't necessarily things set in stone in baseball. You can constantly iterate and improve on what's happening in the game. So that was really eye-opening at the time. And I think after that, I had always assumed I would have to build a career on the business or the marketing side because I wouldn't be taken seriously initially in the baseball and the analytics and the scouting worlds. And so that was my original plan. It led me to work for the Cubs in 2016 and play in the World Series Trophy Tour, which was phenomenal. And we were watching the Hall of Fame video earlier, and they have the footage of Chris Bryant slipping and throwing to Anthony Rizzo, and you tear up because like as a Chicagoan, it was such a beautiful moment. So from there, I then got hired by MLB, but for the longest time, I assumed it would be nearly impossible to initially start in that baseball operations realm because of my child.
You mentioned your mother was on the board of directors for the White Sox.
Yes.
When did that happen?
She was on the ISFA board, so part of the deal that the state of Illinois reached with Mr. Reinsdorf was to have this new overseeing board in order for the White Sox to remain in Chicago. So I believe she got on board probably in the early 2000s, 2002. So we were at the All-Star game in 2003, World Series in 2005, the Paul Konerko, the Joe Greene, Bobby Jenks team. So all of that super formative to be 8 or 9 years old and to be part of that and to understand what it's like to go to the ballpark regularly and be around that environment.
Your mother from Chicago?
She is.
Did she know Bill Beck at all?
I don't believe they ever met, but she worships Bill Beck.
Yeah.
She's a total fan. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to ask her if she has any Bill Beck stories.
Okay, I will.
I might dig up some of those.
Maybe Disco Demolition Night or something?
Well, I'm sure there are better memories. That actually wasn't Bill's idea. That was his son, Mike. Mike takes the blame for that. But, didn't work out as planned. What about you as a player? Have you ever played the game?
I did. Played softball until I was 12 or 13 years old, and then my twin sister Annie and I chose to focus on golf. We were getting some interest from different schools, and we had college offers to play at Yale, Georgetown, Carnegie Mellon, and WashU. And so that really caused us to emphasize and focus on the individual sport, but would watch Hot Stove and all the MLB Network programming every day before school. So always had that North Star in my mind of I want to work in baseball, and I actually ended up going to Northwestern because I knew I could graduate in 3 years versus if I played golf at one of those schools we were recruited by, they would probably want us for 4 or 5 years, and I knew at Northwestern I could move out faster and then start working in baseball.
Yeah. You know, you hear sometimes the criticism from young people, baseball's too slow, it's a little bit dull. That's never been a problem for you, though.
When I was little, it actually was.
It was.
I could probably last maybe 3 outs when we would go to Cubs games when I just had a very short attention span. And, you know, my parents are saints. They wouldn't mind that we, you know, went to Wrigley and sat down and got there and suddenly I was up and on the move. But I would say probably around like when I was 6 or 7 years old, I elongated my attention span a little bit and could, you know, start to finally make it through some games.
Yeah. And it's been your favorite sport since.
Always.
Yeah. Let's talk about your job with the Portland Sea Dogs. They are the AA affiliate of the Red Sox. Development coach, that is something that the Red Sox have started recently. Each of their minor league teams has a development coach. What is that?
Development coach focuses on integrating information both into run creation and prevention. So thinking about the resources and the assets that we have in the front office and bringing them directly to the players and to my fellow coaches. So I would say the 2 realms that I probably work mostly in would be opposing scouting. So thinking about who are we facing today, what should our game plan be against that set of pitchers, and then pitch design with our own internal staff. So how can we take a pitcher's current mix and optimize it, or maybe alter the usage rates in order to make him more successful?
Sounds pretty complicated.
It's really a blast, Bruce. It's
Yeah.
probably one of the most fun jobs I've ever had.
So you've got to scout the opposing teams ahead of time. You got to know what the pitcher's repertoire is, what he throws most of the time, what counts he likes certain pitches, whether he's got good control, not good control. Sounds like you're almost a scout.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say that because with the Reds, I had pro scouting coverage, and I think I bring a lot of that background into my role as a coach because you have to be able to evaluate, and then you also have to know internally what your players want. So like the example I said with Hudson Potts about the fastball velo, also in that window, I mean, sometimes you have seconds of a new reliever's coming in. We have 2 guys who are on the on-deck circle. Katie, what does he have? Katie, what's the bird on the fastball? And so being able to say, here are the 2 or 3 things you have to know, like go crush it. That, again, comes from getting to the players, understanding what they want, and then also recognizing what is going to be the most impactful thing I can say in this moment to help him. Because it's not a test, right? More information isn't necessarily better.
Yeah.
He's not going to be filling out a chart of, you know, Juan Chacin has a 4-seam at this velo and spins in this manner, but he has to hit the ball. So how can I help him hit the ball to the right place and in the right direction that he wants?
So are you with the Sea Dogs only part of the time, and then you're traveling to other locations? How do you mix that up?
Always with the team, the bus rides, everything.
So who gives you the information about the other teams that you then delineate to the players?
We have internal databases at the Red Sox, and then we also partner with a third-party company, True Media. So it's a combination of those 2 repositories.
You can watch film of other teams?
Yes, exactly.
I've heard some scouts say they don't like using film to evaluate talent, especially opposing talent. Is it difficult? Is it easier in person?
I definitely would say if I were considering acquiring a player, I would probably want to see him in person because what I'm looking at is going to be beyond how he performs on the field, whereas the video is going to be cut. Like I want to see how he interacts with his teammates. I want to see how he reacts when the umpire doesn't give him the strike that clearly should have been called in his favor. So from that perspective, from an acquisition hat, I definitely would want to be in person, but I find video to be incredibly valuable from a scouting perspective, especially if I'm working with the player and we can slow it down frame by frame.
Yeah.
Like maybe like Jake Thompson, who's a reliever for us, he and I have been working on this sweeping slider in addition to our pitching coach, Lance Carter, and thinking about, you know, the release angle. Where does he want to move it? How does he want to place his hands? So from that perspective, when we have that frame by frame footage, it's incredibly valuable. And there's really no way to articulate it other than showing it to him visually.
Would it have been possible to do this job in the 80s and 90s before HD, do you think?
That's a good question. I think it could have existed in that I think there's always a place for numbers and for data-driven decision-making in baseball, but I don't think that I would be able to leverage the same resources that I have currently.
Yeah.
Like I definitely am a beneficiary of my time in that perspective.
Yeah. Now, you also have been a first base coach. Is that something you do every game or just some of the games? How does that work into this workflow for you?
Somewhat sporadic when I'm in the lineup or not. I think some of my greatest value comes from being in the dugout and being to work with our hitting coach, Doug Clark, and telling him what the pitch type is. So we can say, Rafael Sedon, he had 3 sliders in the last at bat, and they were all middle away. I think being able to iterate in that moment is super valuable. But I also think being on first base, not only to work with the players in that manner, but I also think for the people who were in the stadium that day to look out, see someone in a high ponytail coaching first base. I think if I had been an 8 or 9-year-old girl and I had seen a woman on the field, that would have been so powerful to me. So I love if I can be that role model too and fill that void.
You sometimes hear people joke in baseball, well, the third base coach has the really hard job. They've got to decide if the runner's going to go home, and if he's out, third base coach is going to get the blame. What about the first base coach? You obviously have some responsibilities. Do they include timing the pitcher? Do you flash a signal to the runner that it's a stolen base or hit and run, or is that done from the dugout? How does that work?
Definitely. So the third base coach, who will normally be our manager, or sometimes it'll be an additional coach of ours, he'll relay the signs to me and then to the players. So again, at AA, they pretty much should know the signs, but I might remind them of, hey, you have a green light, or it's a hit and run, again, just so it's an additional reminder in their ear. I also think there's great value in the first base coach in helping them move to second, because analytically, it's a totally different world if you have a runner on second base, no outs, versus a runner on first base, right, and 1 out. So thinking about that from like a game strategy perspective, really trying to know, maybe they don't feel like they're the most confident base runner in the world, but if I feel like the opposing pitcher has this time, or maybe he has this tendency, or I'm pretty sure it's going to be a changeup or something that's a little bit slower, I might tell them that. So I think being able to be in that moment and to, try to provide that insight, I'm never going to like push them off the base and tell them you have to go here right now, but I do think there is like great value for me to be there and to kind of, again, teach them to think about the game maybe a little bit differently than they have in the past.
Do you put the stopwatch on every pitch?
Yes.
You do. So what's considered a good time for a pitcher to deliver the ball to home plate? What's kind of that break even that indicates, okay, we can steal on this guy?
I would say if there's nobody on base, if they're pretty quick, they're going to be like 1-1, 1-2. You get guys who are a little bit slower who can like get up to like 1-5 or 1-4 on those guys. It's just a green light. You want to move on those types of pitchers.
Yeah. I'm curious also, you've got a runner at first base. You remind him about outfield arms. You say, hey, the right fielder doesn't have very good arm. Anything to right, you need to take third. Does that kind of conversation go on?
Absolutely. Also reminding them of the count of how many outs there are, right? Like, I think it's really easy for a first base or a third base coach to put players in a bad situation if you're not kind of being that voice on their shoulder, reminding them, hey, there's only 1 out. So, if a deep fly ball is hit, remember, you probably have to come back. So again, kind of those fundamental baseball things. Most of the guys at AA, pass with flying colors. They don't necessarily need that, but you always want to make sure that they're not ever in a position where they feel like, oh, like I was on my own out there. I feel like nobody had my back.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the downside of what you're doing in terms of heckling, criticism, insults coming from the stands, coming from even opposing players and coaches. We hear that there's not a lot of bench jockeying in baseball anymore the way there used to be. But has any of that come up in terms of fans or other teams?
Definitely. I wouldn't say there have been any snide remarks from fans. In fact, the first game that I coached in Somerset, I have a really good friend who's an analyst with the Yankees there, and so she was taking photos of me in the dugout to send to my friends and family, and like the players with the Yankees like couldn't have been happier for me. So like from that perspective, I would say the players have been incredibly respectful, fellow coaches have been great. I think if anything, a lot of fans will be surprised to see me in pants, in a jersey, right? Because people have this heuristic, they have this schema of what a baseball coach looks like, and it doesn't look like me. So I think, again, as you're part of a changing tide, as you're part of the changing face of baseball, you're always going to encounter that. And when someone looks at me, they don't see my 6 years in baseball. They don't see that I have an MBA from the University of Chicago. They don't see any of that. They just see a woman in pants. And so I think some of the best advice I got from Bianca Smith, who's also a coach with the Red Sox, the first one who was hired by the team, she said, don't let it ever get to you because you know who you are, you know what you bring to the table. if there's some fan who's on the backfield who maybe is stunned to see you there, know they're hopefully the minority. Like, they are the anomaly, you are not.
Is it more of a case of awkward comments than downright derogatory insults?
I honestly, Bruce, wouldn't say that I've even faced that.
No.
You know, I
Okay.
think people have been very receptive. I think that's a testament to how I carry myself and to, I believe, what the Red Sox have curated in terms of an environment.
Yeah.
You know, Brian Abraham is the only person in baseball to have 2 female coaches hired under his watch. In the same way, Brian Cashman is the only GM to have hired 2 female assistant GMs. And I think it's amazing when you can have those mentors and those champions who are very cognizant of some of the additional things that come with your hire, and to say, we're going to be there for you, we want you here, we are invested in you as a person before an employee.
Did the Red Sox approach you last year after the season? When did that happen?
So I was with the Reds until October 13th of 2021, and I left to take a job at Google. And so when I was at Google, I had gotten calls from several teams, and I was catching up with a friend of mine, Mark Heil, who used to work for the Reds, is now with the Red Sox in their Major League Strategy Group. And I was talking to Mark. I felt like I didn't want to leave Google so soon. You know, I just got there. I had an amazing boss. It was a really high-performing team. And he said, well, Katie, if you're talking to other teams, we have a coaching position, or we have some positions open, and I think you'd be a great fit for them.
Yeah.
So then I got connected with Abe's and Chris Stacio, the assistant director of PD. And Chris was running through some open jobs, and he mentioned the development coach role, and I stopped him and I said, Chris, honestly, do you think someone like me would be a fit for that? And he didn't even hesitate. He said, absolutely, if you're interested, I'll set up some calls for you. So went through that, was still at Google, you know, again, really enjoyed it. I thought big tech was amazing. Google does a lot of things well, and there's a reason why it's earned the reputation that it has. But the chance to be in uniform, that I think is what separated the role of the Red Sox from the other opportunities that I had been speaking with teams about. It just felt like such a once-in-a-lifetime chance that I would regret forever if I turned down.
So your departure from baseball lasted just a few months.
Yes, it was a very brief hiatus.
Do you see yourself staying in the game for the long haul, the next 20, 30, 40 years? Do you see that happening?
I would love to. I'd love to be a baseball lifer. I think there is still so much that I have to learn and so much that I hope I can bring to the game. I think what I really love about the sport is it's incredibly dynamic, and that my job at MLB, my job with the Reds, what I'm doing currently now with Boston, all of it is very unique, and there's synergies and it very much interplays, but I love that I come to work every day and I learn something new, and I don't know if everyone's fortunate enough to have that and to feel like they're making an impact, and I truly believe like I can see where my input and where my value add is on a daily basis, which I don't take for granted.
We continue our conversation with Katie Krall, development coach for the Portland Sea Dogs. We want to take some of your questions as well from the audience. So if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll be happy to field that question for Katie. Let's talk a little bit about your team this year, the Sea Dogs, AA affiliate. AA is where many of the top prospects seem to reside in the game. And I was looking at the statistics, some of your leading hitters, and I may mispronounce the name, but Sedan Rafaela, Devlin Granberg, both having excellent seasons for Portland. Tell us a little bit about your club and some of the highlighted players that we might see in Boston down the line.
Definitely. Well, Brian Baio, who was with us to start the year, is actually going to be in Boston, excuse me, this week pitching. So working with him, phenomenal sinker, incredibly nasty, throws really hard. He's been great. I think the storyline of the Sea Dogs this season has been pitching. And so to be a part of that and to watch guys move up, I feel like I write a transition sheet every week where I'm saying to the development coach, Worcester, and the pitching coach, Paul Abbott, you know, this is what this guy has, here's what he's working on, this is where we feel like he could improve in, maybe throwing more competitive strikes, winning the 1-1 count. So that's been awesome to see. Really equipping the guys and giving them the tools to move up the next level. So Baio is definitely somebody to watch. In terms of guys that we still have here, Jay Groom is on the 40-man roster. Red Sox signed him in 2016, I believe. So a lot of great arms. I think the guys who threw a little bit harder, like Frank Herman, Chase Shugart, they're moving up. Not to say that velo is the main calling card. I think that those who still have control and who can still mix their stuff really well, they're going to play the best. But to see kind of like the spectrum of pitchers that we've had this year has been really interesting and fun to work with. You know, we've had guys who throw 89, 90, like sidearm race, and then we've had guys who can get up to 99 or 100. So definitely like an eclectic mix.
Well, I remember when throwing 90 to 92 was considered good, that you were considered to have a power fastball. Now it seems like you almost don't get much attention unless you're throwing 93, 94, 95. But as we see with somebody like Nestor Cortez of the Yankees, it's not all about velocity either.
Absolutely, and I think there's a lot of sexiness to the radar gun, and I think you have a lot of young players who sell out for velo. You know, they'll max out at showcases, they'll throw like 2 innings. They don't really care where they put the ball, it's more so about, you know, hitting that number. Excuse me, I think Brian Van Bell, who just came to us from Greenville, is a great kind of counter example to what can happen when you are more of a command over stuff types of pitcher. You know, he's got a five pitch mix in the fastball, the curve, the cutter, the slider, and the changeup, and they're all good pitches. But I think what's really going to differentiate him, and why I see him kind of as a Zach Davies, a Kyle Hendricks type, is the ability to know how to get hitters out. And I think at the AA level, having that plan of attack on both sides of the ball when you're going up to bat and when you're pitching on the mound, thinking about what am I going to use out of my arsenal to beat you like a chess match, that's when you separate yourself if you're not throwing 99 or 98, because you have to have that cognitive ability. I think Chris Young is a great example of that too. You know, I asked him, what would you do on the flights when you were in San Diego and you were flying to Chicago or you were all over the US? And he said, Katie, the minute I got on the flight, I was preparing for my next start. That was my sole focus. And I think, you know, being really aware and hypersensitive to how you can get someone else out, it's a total necessity in this game.
Yeah. Well, every player in AA is certainly a professional player and a player of some ability. Not every player is a prospect, but you do have a lot of prospects that tend to be at AA. What's a good number in a given year? If a team like the Red Sox has X number of prospects, 6, 7, 8, is that considered good, or do they want even more than that?
I have a very good mentor of mine who's a scout with the Reds who always told me it's like the rule of thirds. So a third of the guys will move to the next level, a third of the guys might stay there or go down, a third might make the big leagues. And I think when you can find that middle class in baseball, where like everybody can tell who's really good, everyone for the most part can tell who's struggling, but it's where do you find that like 45, 55 guy who might have 1 or 2 carrying tools that can take him to AAA or beyond. That I think that's what the best scouts can do. Like anyone can tell you, oh wow, you know, like I think that Ronnie Mauricio is going to move up, or I think that Adley Rutschman is going to have a big league career. It's more so how do you find those fringe guys and how can you get them to where you hopefully see them going.
Yeah. Does Portland carry any minor league veterans on its roster?
We have Brett Kennedy and Kyle Hart, who both have big league service time. In terms of minor league journeymen, I wouldn't necessarily say we have a ton. I think with the very dynamic nature of the game, especially with minor league free agency and the way that teams go about their acquisition process, I think that there are certain traits that front offices are looking for now that they probably weren't even 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. Tell us about your manager.
Chad Epperson has been with the Red Sox for 18 years.
He's here?
No. I think Eppy's golfing today.
Okay.
Epp has been with the Red Sox for 18 years. He obviously has quite a few World Series rings. He was previously the catching coordinator and now has transitioned to the dugout, wanting to be part of that daily grind again and to be in a clubhouse setting more often.
And he's been receptive to you.
Absolutely. It was his idea to have my mom throw out the first pitch on Mother's Day.
Oh, wow.
And I think when I got hired, you know, I called Chad and I said, you know, I'm very honored and privileged to be part of your staff. Like, whatever you need in terms of information or me getting acclimated, like, know that I'm here and that I want to work with and learn from you. And so I think having him has been very valuable for me. Again, he's allowed me to focus a lot on the pitch design process and really hone in on pitching, and then also wearing the double hat of working with our hitting coach and opposing scouting. So I think, you know, Epp recognizes that, like, there is a lot of value in me being in different roles, and so I think he's kind of allowed me to have that liberal arts approach, I guess, to coaching.
Yeah. Years ago, I used to do public
question
address.
for you. Sorry, can I ask a question?
Go right ahead, yeah.
I was just interested in learning more just about players and interacting with you. Like stolen bases are down, and I think about being on first base. Is there a data set for stolen bases that might be coming back, or take it a different direction? Do players come to you and say, how do we gather data to maybe solve this problem?
Absolutely, and I think what's cool with the minor leagues this year is they've actually like expanded the bases a few inches to incentivize more action on the base paths. I think from my days at MLB, like people are very aware of the changing nature of run scoring and how home runs are on the rise, strikeouts are on the rise. And while a home run can be exciting, it's it's an episode. It's not necessarily an elongated series of events like a single is, then a stolen base, then a sac bunt. In terms of the players, we definitely have guys who like to run and they like having that as a component of their game. So they will be aggressive and they will take advantage of it. I think the most valuable information from a base stealing perspective isn't necessarily quantitative, it's more so tells. So does he flare his glove when he throws a changeup? If he's going to throw a changeup, I'm going to go, right? I'm not going to go on the 90-mile-an-hour fastball. So tipping pitches, also thinking about moves. Some guys have terrible pickoff moves, like they're not John Lester bad, but they're pretty close. So thinking about, like when he maybe, if he's going to set at his chest, like, no, he's not going to throw to you. So that's your cue. So I think from that perspective, the data set is far more watching the video and being able to evaluate what the pitcher is doing physically more so than any like hard numbers on him.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else with questions from the audience? Want to make sure we get those. I was going to ask about what it's like in the minor leagues today. Years ago, I used to do public address for the Utica Blue Sox, the Oneonta Tigers, when they were minor league affiliates. And I remember when the roving instructors would come in, or somebody from the big team's front office would come by, one of the key people in the front office. Is that the kind of thing that still happens on a regular basis at the AA level?
Yes, so we have coordinators who will come in, and then also we'll have front office executives, excuse me, who will make sporadic appearances.
Any particular names, big names that we should be aware of?
Chaim will probably come to Portland in June, or in July, excuse me, sorry, I don't even know what year it is.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of coordinators, and I think
And that's the general manager, Chaim Bloom, right? Yeah.
Chaim is the president of baseball
President,
operations.
yeah.
We'll have Ben Crockett, who's the VP of player development for the Red Sox. He'll come in pretty regularly. His son Caleb was in the other day, which was awesome. I made him help me fill out my scorecard. So yeah, we have a lot of interface and a lot of interaction with the front office. And then the coordinators help, I think, preach the philosophy, make sure from the top down, all affiliates are focusing on the same types of development. So you don't have stereo teaching, which I think for many years, a lot of organizations suffered from, in that you would go to high A and you would hear something from a pitching coach, and then suddenly you get to double A, and it was completely different messaging of throw the slider, we love it, versus no, only throw your curveball, right? So I think the more continuity we can have, the better for the player.
Yeah. Were you with the Red Sox in spring training?
I was, yes.
Yeah. Tell us about that. Were you able to meet any of the Red Sox legends? A lot of teams will bring in former players to be spring training coaches. Any chance to meet any of the Red Sox of the past?
Trying to think. Nobody, probably like an early vintage. Like, got to know Alex Cora a lot. AC is great. Will Venable. Had really good conversations with Will. He and Chris Younger are super close. Really bright guy. Like I hope and expect to see him managing a big league dugout someday. So I think to have that exposure to the big league coaching staff and think about what they're looking for. Like AC is huge on controlling the running game. So we like constantly reiterate to our pitchers, just so you know, if and when you move up, this is something that he's prioritizing. So work on your pickoff move, make sure that you're quick to home, make sure you're aware of the base runner and things don't go awry when you runners on base. So from that perspective, no, I wouldn't say they're like we're any great legends, unfortunately not. But I think that also probably was a product of the CBA negotiation and timing being a little bit off with the deal not being reached until later in what would normally be spring training.
Yeah, things were very much rushed. Picking up on Alex Cora, you mentioned his ability to control the running game. I'm amazed at what he's done with the Red Sox. I didn't think they would be that great this year, especially with Chris Sale being injured. It seemed like maybe they overachieved a bit last year. They come back to earth, but he's obviously in a tough division with the Yankees, but they're playing exceptionally well. They're in wild card position. What makes him so good? He's obviously made a difference there.
it's amazing. I remember when I got hired by the Red Sox, everyone kept raving about AC. You know, he's the best manager. No one can connect with players like him. No one can connect with staff like him. And it's true. I think what separates him, Bruce, from other managers that I've known and worked with, I think, is his ability to authentically connect with someone. So, you know, whether it's like talking to me about golf or maybe asking somebody about their family, like he takes the time to get to know you on an individual basis. And because he has been in such high-level situations before, he knows what it takes to win, and there is no question that's what they're there to do.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, people might assume, oh, every baseball team's trying to compete every day, and that can be correct to a certain extent. What AC wants and what he expects is excellence, and so that's phenomenal to be a part of. And I think that is what separates the Red Sox from other clubs. Is there isn't a need to win, there is an expectation to win.
Final question for Katie Krall. Speaking of managers, is that something you see yourself doing? Would you like to be, let's say, a minor league manager in the next 4 or 5 years? Is that on your wish list?
I honestly had never thought coaching was possible, let alone managing. I definitely would be open to it. I think I might see myself more in a front office or like a lead position in the future, but I think if that opportunity came, I think Rachel's done an amazing job and has really stepped up communication. So I would definitely be open to it. I don't know. I'll have to keep you posted on that one.
Yeah. How's Rachel doing with Tampa? I haven't
She's
followed their
doing great.
record.
Yeah, she's doing well. I
Yeah.
think the Yankees wanted to give her a leadership position. Like she had put in the time, she has the experience, and so this, I think, for her, while some people might have said, "Oh my gosh, this is such a surprise," I think for people who know her and know her resume, this is just one stop on her very long career in the game.
Well, whatever the future holds, we look forward to seeing you play a major role in some part of baseball, either for a team or for Major League Baseball again. Who knows down the line? But it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Katie Krall, development coach for the Portland Sea Dogs. We thank Katie for the time. We thank you for coming out to the Bullpen Theater. We also want to thank our viewers on Facebook Live. For those of you that are here in the museum, we do have an artifact spotlight coming up at 3 o'clock, which, if my watch hasn't stopped again, which it's been doing the last couple of days, is about 15 minutes away. So 3 o'clock in our Learning Center, and appropriately enough, the topic for today's artifact spotlight is women in baseball. So that's coming up 3 in the Learning Center. Thank you, Katie. Thanks, everybody else, for being with us here at the Baseball Hall of Fame. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.